All right, hello everyone. Welcome to this discussion on decentralizing forces in AI. Happy to be here with you today. First, just to introduce our guests, why don't you guys each take your turn, tell us a little bit who you are and why you're here.
Hey, I'm Dillon Rolnick. I'm with News Research. We build open source AI models. We have a series of popular models called Hermes, and we are basically committed to taking open source to the state of the art and past it.
Hey everyone, I'm Phil McMannis, CEO and co-founder of Beacon Protocol. We are a private data layer for agents and models and AI to be able to collaborate and use private data in a way that redistributes incentive and access to private and proprietary data.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm Daniel Shapiro. I am on the Blockworks research team. So, first question, and we're going to start off kind of high picture here. Why does it matter to each of you that AI is decentralized? Obviously, it seems like this incredibly powerful technology. I'm just curious about why it matters to you and why it might matter to everyone here that it is developed kind of in the open and in a decentralized manner.
Yeah, I gave a talk about this not too long ago, and the point of the talk is basically that there is a ton of influence and control that happens with AI. Like, that's obvious. Everybody here knows how influential an information tool AI models can be. The thing that's going on behind the scenes that isn't as apparent when you're using ChatGPT or you're using Claude to make you a better coder or a better employee or whatever you use it for is that they're toying with this thing called alignment, which is it takes many different forms. Oftentimes, when people talk about alignment, they mean align the model so that it's not capable of being used as a weapon for everyday people. You wouldn't want a criminal to have access to the ability to create a bomb, right? And so they say, they use this as the way to say, no, we shouldn't do things open source, right? Because if anybody has access to this, then anybody could build a bomb. And they use that to justify their sort of moral judgment, right? They're like, this thing is morally reprehensible and this thing isn't. If you do something morally reprehensible, I'm literally willing to report you to authorities. That's one version of alignment. A second version of alignment is basically we don't want to be able to subtly nudge people in certain directions, right? You don't want Elon Musk basically talking about white genocide every time you ask it about HBO. And so they'll use that again as hey, we need somebody that's going to make sure that we're not influencing people in the wrong ways. But the third and most important type of alignment is we need to align models to respect human beings and organic life. And what these centralized labs truly believe is we are the people that should take that power on. The stakes are so high, we're the only ones capable of deciding what goes into a model, not so that they don't go off the rails and cause mass destruction. I think that that's ridiculous, and the best way to expose rot in a system is to shine a spotlight on it, and the only way to do it ethically is to do it in the open and do open source research and open science. And if you leave it in their hands, it's incredibly dangerous, and you can't trust tech moguls with the truth, what's morally reprehensible, and the fate of human society largely.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Dillon said there, and I'll add one of the things that I think is really important about it is looking at being able to get access to resources and being able to build an AI. I think everyone probably saw in the news over the last couple of days, we're seeing Mark Zuckerberg go out and try and offer $100 million salaries to AI talent. We're back to having these centralized labs and centralized groups go and gobble up talent out there and pay crazy amounts of money. How does that start to enable people to do what they want to do with AI? If you're not one of the largest companies in the world, how do you start to use AI in a way that you want it to perform? How do you customize it in a way that fits your needs as a business or as an individual if none of the resources out there are available because they've all been gobbled up? Or you want to be able to make changes and customizations to a model that fits a specific need. you're unable to do that because the access to the technology isn't available, because the hardware is made unavailable, and that cutting resources and assets off from people building is a massive, massive way to stifle innovation in a way that, well, I guess, stifle the democratization of innovation and putting it in the hands of a few. And that's just not productive and not where we need to be going if we're really going to drive results and growth in AI innovation.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And it seems like, I feel like a lot of people here probably got into crypto through Bitcoin, maybe like myself. And I feel like all the same things you're talking about, it reminds me of, kind of the same ethos of getting into crypto and, decentralizing money. But you could argue AI is maybe an even more powerful technology or more important resource. So great answers there. So maybe moving now into, some more practical applications here. How would you say, right, when we talk about decentralized AI, how does that actually manifest itself across the AI supply chain, right? So in terms of data, models, and compute. And I know both of you kind of, have specialty in a couple of those. So maybe, Dillon, you can go first and talk about kind of more the model and compute side.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that basically everything you do in AI is highly parallelizable. The fundamental function of AI is matrix multiplication, which is very amenable to being done in parallel. It's why GPUs are the primary piece of hardware used for AI in the first place. And it's true across the board, basically. So at Noose, we were, like I said in the intro, we had basically done most of our work fine-tuning a base model, which is basically the process of you take this big kind of amorphous intelligence and you shape it into something that's more capable of being communicated with. So if you have a base model, what it's doing is it's next token prediction, right? So it's reflecting the entire corpus of written human text, and you'll get some crazy things if you let it just ramble on. In post-training, you take that big amorphous blob and shape it into like a helpful assistant or whatever it may be. And to post-train, you need a base model. So we were highly reliant on, it was mostly Meta at the time, releasing these big models, spending just unfathomable amounts of money doing this essentially for free, maybe to undercut competitors, who knew? But we took this, we sat down in a group and we're like, okay, if the faucet turns off and people aren't willing to incentivize these things for one way or another, Zuck wakes up one day and he's like, you know what? I don't like wasting this much money. We're like, okay, we would be dead in the water. Most of the AI community generally who's not behind these closed walls in these closed companies would be dead in the water. And so we started thinking, like, what is it exactly that keeps people from being able to do this on their own? And it's kind of one primary bottleneck we identified among others. But that bottleneck is basically a bandwidth constraint. So when you're training a gigantic model, you have thousands of GPUs in the same room working on this problem in parallel. But the problem is, after every single step of computation, they need to communicate their results back to one another and do basically like a big averaging of what everybody worked on. So to do that, they're passing terabytes of data, and in order to make it like feasible, you could do it right, like with a small, normal kind of bandwidth setup, but it would take forever. So to make it feasible, they got this specialized interconnect, and they just plugged every GPU into one another, and it happens in the blink of an eye, so the bandwidth problem is solved by hardware. We started thinking, like, what if there was another way? And we started looking into things like JPEG compression and different techniques for compression, and found that we could reduce the amount of communication being passed during training time by 4,000x. So instead of having to pass terabytes of data, you're passing megabytes of data, and you don't need specialized cables, you can use internet bandwidth. And so that was kind of like the first time we thought, okay, you can connect nodes from across the globe and get something resembling centralized training setups, and then you can start from a base model, and we can talk more about the techniques that come after having a base model, but that's one of the primary things that we have been working on lately.
Yeah, so one of the things that we actually just kicked off this month is the creation of the first ever community sourced and built AI model specific to vehicle data. This is something that we've done in conjunction with DeMo, the vehicle DePin network, and Flock, one of the decentralized model building platforms, What's really interesting about, one, in terms of why we did this, and two, why decentralization is the way that this becomes possible, is that what was going on is DEMA was looking at how do they allow AI models and agents to use the data that's being generated from the vehicle. And it's such a specific thing that if you take a look at ChatGPT, the LLMs, they're a language and reasoning layer, they don't have that high level of context and knowledge about the information that's being generated by a vehicle. There's actually only a handful of organizations in the world that have ever really had that before, and that's been large vehicle manufacturers. So DEMO's made it possible for decentralized groups of people to be able to take ownership of that data in their vehicle. We've then allowed that data to be connected together through Beacon protocol in a way that's entirely consent-based, and being able to produce that data into a data set that then Flock's model building team can go out and build. And it's really interesting, we talk about the decentralization of resources. They've got 20 of the top 100 Kaggle model builders participating in their community. That's a level of talent that very few people could manage to go out and just acquire on their own. And what becomes interesting is the output of this becomes this small specialized model that is this first version of it is gonna focus on understanding vehicle efficiency, feedback for you as a driver, feedback of what may be going on inside of your engine that you don't even know about, burning extra fuel, pollution, all these different things. That then becomes available to the community to build applications on that inside of the DEMO ecosystem, to be able to provide new user experiences that improves our everyday lives. And separate from that, it's not just that, but think about the value of that model downstream to things like vehicle manufacturers that could want to be able to license and use that model that's been created. They have those same challenges of how are they going to go out and hire 20 of the top 100 Kaggle model builders? The answer is they aren't, because a lot of these people like participating in these decentralized and open source environments where they can participate and be a part of that. So the interesting thing about this all happening in a decentralized way is that we also know all of the contributions that were made, the contributions to the data where it came from, the contributions from who trained and created that model, the contributions of the organizations that were involved in making this happen. And you can then be able to use those contributions to redistribute the ownership of that model, to redistribute the ownership of AI. And it goes even a step further with, you then take a look at people that are using applications built on top of that. With ChatGPT, if you're using the free version, that data is going right back to OpenAI. In this world, you can contribute that data that when you're running inference and using it, you can recontribute your data back to further version updates of that model and get a piece of ownership of that going forward. That does not happen in a centralized environment. The only way that happens is decentralized, and being able to use decentralized technologies like blockchain, cryptography, and all of the different things that come together in these communities to make those builds. So that's I think, a really concrete example of something that happens in a decentralized environment that just does not work in a centralized one.
Yeah, so really what you're saying is if you have useful data or maybe private data, that can now be applied to train smaller but more specific models. And this could theoretically happen over a network like Psyche, what Noose is building, where instead of having to source compute from a hyperscaler that has these cluster, these InfiniBand link clusters of high performance NVIDIA chips, maybe you just lease cheaper compute, from like a spot market like a Psyche, from GPUs that are distributed all across the globe, because they're able to train over the internet and they don't all have to be in the same data center. And so it seems like, it seems like what you're building, there's synergies across all these parts of the stack, and it seems like there will have to be solutions across decentralizing, the data, the models, and the compute to kind of create these full end-to-end pipelines. Like, agree?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, cool. So yeah, why don't we get into kind of some user-facing, maybe some more consumer use cases, right? Like for the everyday person out there, if you guys are able to decentralize the AI stack, right? Like what are some of the benefits that the everyday person would see from that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of this matters except for ethically. unless you're actually creating like some of the world's best models. And what we're doing is primarily a question of openness and open science and decentralization of power for sure, but the decentralization of resources and things like that is mainly a means to accomplish this open science and open source goal. And so what do we actually want to do in the end? It's like, if you can create open source models that are competitive, as good or better as a closed source model, which I believe you can if you have these tools to accumulate these resources across disparate geographies. If you can do that, there's a very poor reason for existence for a closed source model. There's not like these benefits you get by being closed source, or at least closed weight, right? Like the weights of the model themselves. It's hard to justify that as some sort of user experience benefit that you would get in something like, say, Apple. So as long as there's people out there willing to undercut closed source models with open source models, I think pretty hard to justify the alternative. But there's a bunch of techniques, again, that we are working on to actually make these things incredibly useful. Remember, I was saying like a base model is just this amorphous blob, pretty hard to use. You may have been paying attention and seen a bunch of stuff going around about reinforcement learning lately, which is basically the idea that you could give a model some task, and if you can verify whether that task was done correctly or not, you can let the model figure it out for itself and then train on what it's done. And that's super powerful. I heard anecdotally, so these closed labs used to spend something like 90% of their resources getting a base model. It's incredibly computationally expensive. And then 10% sort of everything else, fine-tuning, et cetera. That's switched to the point that it's 50-50, 50% pre-training, 50% reinforcement learning. And that's a problem that's actually really good for open source and really good for decentralization and distribution, because the hardware requirements aren't as strict. It benefits from a diversity of outlooks and opinions. Like the more tasks you can contribute, the better you can do reinforcement learning, basically. So if you put like an open source repo out, like we did this 2 months ago, we put out this open source repo where you could contribute your own tasks. We got 1,200 contributions in 60 days. And that's significant. There's 1,200 different tasks now that like anybody could train a model on.
Yeah, I think it continues to move towards that ability to do customization of the experience that you're having. I think I would say as an average everyday consumer, the biggest impact is really around ownership and being able to, get, as I mentioned, being able to get incentive for your contributions and rewards to your contributions to what you've done, because that's the one thing that we're all doing every day, is that we're producing incredible amounts of data. And that data is being used in the foundational models that we use every day when we use for AI. It's being used to be able to create, smaller specialized models, being used in reinforcement learning. And I think the ability to have ownership of that contribution that you're doing and redefining what I would sort of call the supply chain of what happens around data, compute, everything in AI, being able to redefine that supply chain is really what can make a fundamental difference for you as a consumer in terms of having a piece of what you're using, which is, the traditional Web3, having ownership of a decentralized application or use case that you're participating in. But I think the other really big piece of it is, as Dillon was mentioning earlier, is around transparency of knowing that you're not being you're not being subliminally influenced, or you're not being steered away by a specific AI. We all know and have seen the stories of what's happened on social media, how different algorithms can skew you to see a different thing, which changes your mind and how you think about things. What happens is we look at using AI more and more. It's a totally different thing looking at a piece of information on a screen and deciding as yourself how you view that and how you react to that. It's a whole other thing seeing an output from an AI that's telling you, here's what I've arrived at, here's why this is how I'm thinking about it. It becomes much more difficult for you mentally to start to question that because you're being shown so much more evidence. So I think that's another really big thing on the consumer experience side is being able to be protected from bias, being able to be protected from shifting your behavior and how you think. And I think that's going to get even worse as we think about, or not even worse, but an even bigger challenge to solve as we think about things like agentic AI, about there's already people starting to work on, headless AI generated websites where everyone gets a completely different experience when they come to that. How do you know if you're getting a different experience? How do you start to make your own decisions on that? I just don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And that's where I think we all need to work together on the decentralization and the accountability of these organizations that are making that happen. And I don't think the accountability is going to solve it. I think we need to be collaborating together as society to decentralize that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I feel like I even see myself with various workflows, right? I'm relying more and more on the AI, and you could see as, let's say, one of these labs like an OpenAI wants to monetize, and I know we talked about this before. It could start off as, you search what's the best burger place in Manhattan, and an advertiser got in there, and the model kind of shifts you to who the advertiser says, but you could see how that's a slippery slope where with a lot of other much more important things, there could be bias injected into there that could be detrimental to you as the end user. And that might kind of lead into the next question, which is, do you feel like that is the main value proposition here? If you're offering kind of differentiation across maybe something like privacy or bias, or do you actually think that decentralized models will be as powerful or potentially more powerful in terms of just raw intelligence as the kind of frontier models made by the main AI labs?
I mean, I do think at some point decentralized systems, in what exact form that takes, like it's probably not everybody with a laptop is co-training a model. It's a spectrum. I do think at some point open source models that are trained in decentralized setups will be better than closed alternatives, but I think there's a lot of small wins that you can have right now. Like if you've used models, they're very listy, they're very annoying, they're very obsequious. These are really irritating behaviors that seem like, okay, maybe you can prompt around them, but the truth is they're pretty ingrained into the model themselves, and it comes out. So we're doing this post-training of models using a data set we call Hermes 4, and we're making them reasoning models. And the reasoning model is basically you let a model sit there, spend some tokens thinking about the problem, and eventually come to an answer. And the theory is if you let it think for a little bit, the odds that the answer it comes to is correct is a lot higher than if it just spits something out. And when you do reasoning training on these base models, so we did it previously on the same base model without reasoning. Now that we're doing it with reasoning this year, you're getting these annoying behaviors just reinforced and impossible to deal with. And it comes a little bit back to this alignment thing we were talking about, but these corporations have shareholders and people they're beholden to, so they have these policies that they've beaten into the models. And so you can't ask a llama model, even of the previous generation, to think about a problem without it mentioning its policy. It's oh, well, my policy says I shouldn't talk about this or that. And it winds up really screwing up the reasoning. And it delivers just a straight up worse result. So I think that's something that will become obvious as more people try to do reinforcement learning and try to do reasoning fine-tunes on base models. They're going to come to this realization that no, the thing that we are starting from is actually not great, and there will be a lot of innovation on that front where you're just getting straight up better experiences.
Yeah, I think one of the areas that's interesting and for the ability to outperform is as we talk about agents and what agents are doing and executing tasks. For anyone that's not familiar with sort of the current theory of agentic AI, is being able to have AI agents tap in, create, have other AI agents execute subtasks, be able to go into marketplaces of agents that have been created and tap them in. I like to sort of equate that to think about if you're hiring a company to do something for you, or what happens inside of an organization. All those people have a specialized task. Same sort of thing happens with agents. I think what becomes really interesting as we think about data privacy for agents, and as you start to see people doing things with your personal data, how do you stop rogue agents from taking and siphoning off information? If you rely on a centralized environment to do that, you're completely trusting that centralized technology to do that. And I think what becomes really interesting as we think about agentic AI data collaboration at a memory layer, which memory is one of the areas where there's been a lot more development happening in AI right now. One of the examples that I like to use is, think about if you have an AI agent that's booking, let's totally abstract crypto from this. Let's say they're booking a vacation for you. There's an overall travel agent that's executing that larger task. They're going to tap in a flight booking agent, a hotel booking agent, a restaurant booking agent, a tour booking agent. Not all of those agents need access to all of your information and data. Not all of those agents need your passport. Only the one that's booking the flight needs it. Not all of them need the ability to execute payments on your behalf. You also may have different levels of sensitivity as a user on trusting different types of agents. You may be extremely skeptical about AI agents, and you only want agents with a reputation score from, whatever group measured at a 99 or above to be able to touch things for your information. You say, you know what, I don't care. Sure, anything over a 70 is good for me. I think what becomes really interesting is being able to look at how that collaboration happens in a memory layer, and being able to have programmability of that data and information to control that. That's the type of thing that puts you as a user in control of your information, rather than trusting a traditional centralized organization to make those decisions for you based on their data governance policy, or what an individual that's sitting in there decides to do on their own.
Yeah, and a lot of what you just said, made me instantly think about crypto. So maybe we tie that into here, right? If we do live in a world with all these different agents, right? You're generating all this data. You want to potentially sell data for training purposes. Maybe you're managing a bunch of agents. All these things need to talk to each other, right? They need to pay each other. Maybe you guys could talk about how crypto and AI can kind of come together to help enable this future. Like, I know, for instance, Noose is building on Solana. So maybe Dillon, you could start.
Yeah. I mean, again, the goal is to do open source because it's correct, and I think the talent pool is immense. And if you can get all these people working on this problem collaboratively, you can get excellent results. But like a little small example is, like, you've all heard of DeepSeek. A lot of what they did was just take other people's research papers and implement that effectively. Like, they took ideas from Llama. Like, it's not stealing, it's open source. A lot of people who work in this industry want their work out there. They want to be doing open source work, so the recruiting ground is extremely fertile. And so we're thinking about this from the vantage of, like, how do you create excellent AI models? And crypto gives you a lot of the tools that you would want to use, and one of which is just straight up paying people. Like, yeah, they like to have their work recognized, but they also like to be paid. So crypto gives you some financial rails to accomplish things like that, but there's all these other participants that come together to create a model. We were talking about pre-training a model and the resources required, right? Like, the only other option is to go around to private companies, private investment firms, accumulate enough capital that you can break ground on a new data center and train a gigantic model. Or can you use crypto and some of the lessons that have been learned in crypto to bring those people operating this hardware together and work on this problem? So I think, like, we view it as a tool that's extremely useful in accomplishing this model of getting excellent open source AI models into the world.
Yeah, I think crypto really comes down to solving that contribution supply chain concept that I mentioned. Being able to look at all of the contributions that a community put into it. That's a mix of different things. It's a mix of data, training, compute. There's so many different pieces of the AI stack, and being able to bring traceability to what was done for those contributions. I think crypto becomes a very quick and easy way to reward those contributions and understanding what's happening. I think it also becomes a really interesting way to start to look at valuing assets inside of the AI stack and those contributions. Whether that's the value of data on a specific data set, where it's the value on a specific model, where it's the value of community members and their contributions into making that happen. I really think that streamlining the payments and the incentives with crypto is the best way to do that. I think as well as we talk about agents and a future where agents are executing tasks, it's the only way that really becomes streamlined and efficient is around being able to use crypto to do that. Even if it's stable coins, that's the best way to be able to handle these super micro transactions without an intermediary, and being able to understand the incentive that drives, and being able to reward what they're doing, compensating those contributions as well.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, right? Like if intelligence itself or compute, right, is a new resource, that could be tokenized as well, and it all seems very synergistic. Yeah, it's definitely a future I am hopeful for. So yeah, just maybe any closing remarks with you guys?
No, I mean, I appreciate you guys having us here. I think there's a lot of people in this room that came to crypto likely because they were rejecting basically what was happening in centralized finance. And the genesis of Bitcoin is no one person should control the money supply. It's too powerful and it's not, benefiting everybody. So maybe we can opt out. And I think it's equally important to do that with intelligence for different reasons, but a lot of the same philosophical things that underpin what created Bitcoin is why we created the work that we were doing. It was OpenAI used to give us this awesome research that we could play with and make our own. They stopped doing that at some point, and we were all sitting there okay, now what, right? So I think if that's important to you and you resonate with any of those ideas, come check out what we're doing and maybe contribute.
Yeah, I think I'll say, I think a lot of what Dillon said at the start around alignment is a really important takeaway for everyone. Be skeptical of centralized AI. Ask questions of what's happening, who's making those decisions. We've already seen, what happened with Web 2 social media and is still happening, continue to happen there. So I think be skeptical of the centralized services out there, and remember that if you're contributing to something, you should be receiving reward for that. So try to look for ways to utilize AI that rewards those contributions as well.
All right, thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.